The door creaked open, darkness swallowing the light. Samuel Hayes, 32, and no stranger to bad decisions, kicked it wide. This time, he'd get it right. In the corner, Ayanna crouched, a vision of raw allure, her bronze skin glistening under the faint glow, every curve sculpted like desert stone smoothed by time. Her tattered lingerie, a fragile web of black lace, clung to her body, barely concealing the swell of her full breasts, the taut curve of her waist flaring into rounded hips. Sweat traced a slow path down her throat, pooling in the delicate hollow of her collarbone, her skin radiating heat in the stifling room. Long black hair cascaded over one shoulder, framing the fierce, unyielding spark in her dark eyes that locked onto his. Desire surged in his chest, a primal pull, teetering between worship and ruin. "You've seen me like this, cowboy," she purred, her Apache accent weaving through the words like a sultry melody. "Marry me, or we're both dead." His grip tightened on the doorframe. Her shallow breaths lifted the lace, the fabric straining against her curves, each rise and fall a silent dare. He'd scouted Apache lands, knew the cost of crossing lines. Boots pounded closer, voices thick with drunken menace. Samuel stepped in, kicking the door shut. The air between them crackled, heavy with unspoken hunger. Before we ride deeper into this tale, drop a comment and let us know where you're following along from. Every story needs witnesses. Samuel's trailcoat swallowed Ayanna's small frame as they dropped through the window into the muddy alley. When he lifted her by the waist, careful, respectful, but feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric, she didn't pull away. Her hands gripped his shoulders, and for a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, they were close enough to share breath, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of sage in her hair, feel the tremor in her frame that had nothing to do with fear. "This way," he whispered, and she followed without question. The wagon rolled out of Las Cruces with pursuit thundering behind them. Inside the canvas-covered bed, Ayanna sat wrapped in his coat, and Samuel felt every mile stretch between them like a taut rope. The coat had fallen open slightly, revealing the curve of her thigh where the shift had torn high. She noticed his quick glance and pulled the fabric closed, not with shame, but with the measured caution of a woman who knew the power of such glimpses. When she asked where he was taking her, her voice carried something new, not just wariness, but a kind of testing, like she was taking his measure. "North," he said, "until it's safe." But safety felt like a luxury neither of them could afford, especially when every glance in the mirror showed her watching him with those dark, unreadable eyes. The campfire painted her face in golden shadow. Ayanna had mended his torn coat with quick, sure stitches, making it stronger than before. As she worked, the firelight caught the gentle curve of her neck, the way her lips pressed together in concentration. When she leaned forward to bite off the thread, the loose neckline of her shift revealed the hollow of her throat, and Samuel found himself following the line down to where shadows began. When she handed the coat back, their fingers brushed, and the touch seemed to linger longer than necessity demanded. "In the room," she said quietly, "you didn't look at me the way they did." "Why?" Samuel met her gaze across the flames. "Because I've seen enough of what happens when men stop seeing a woman as a person." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Something shifted between them, a door opening just a crack. They slept on opposite sides of the fire that night. But Samuel found himself listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, aware of every small movement she made in sleep. Once, when she turned in her bedroll, the coat slipped from her shoulder, and moonlight painted her bare arm silver. He looked away, but the image burned behind his closed eyes. Dawn came gray and cold. As Ayanna knelt by the creek to wash, Samuel watched from the corner of his eye. She'd removed his shirt, washing in just the mended shift. The thin fabric, wet from her ablutions, clung to the curves of her body, outlining the fullness of her breasts, the narrow taper of her waist. When she bent to cup water in her hands, the shift pulled tight across her hips, and Samuel felt his mouth go dry. She straightened, catching his look, and for a moment neither spoke. Then she pulled his shirt back on, but her movements were unhurried, almost deliberate, as if she wanted him to see, wanted to test the boundaries of his honor. "They're coming," she said simply, her keen ears picking up what his distracted mind had missed. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, like harbingers of hell. Samuel recognized the leader's ugly grin from the boarding house, the man who'd laughed outside her prison door. "Stay inside," Samuel said, checking his rifle. But when the confrontation came, Ayanna didn't cower in the wagon bed. Her voice rose clear and strong. "If you shoot, they'll kill you before you can reload." "I know," Samuel replied, never taking his eyes off the leader. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. The leader's gaze kept drifting to the wagon, hungry and possessive. Samuel stepped deliberately into his line of sight, blocking the view. It was then he understood. She wasn't just cargo to protect. She was becoming his partner in this deadly dance. The riders wheeled away, but not before the leader spat his promise. "We'll be seeing you, Freight Man." That night, they camped closer together. As they shared their meager supper, Ayanna's knee brushed against his, and she didn't pull away. The simple contact sent heat racing through his veins. "You could have fought them today," she said quietly. "Fight when you have to," Samuel replied. "Hide when it keeps you alive." "And you'd hide again for me?" "For as long as I have to." The silence that followed wasn't empty. She shifted closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. When she looked at him in the firelight, her eyes held a new kind of question, one that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with the current that hummed between them whenever they were near. The second day brought heat that made the air shimmer like water. Ayanna had taken to wearing only the mended shift during the day, his coat folded beside her in the wagon bed. As they traveled, Samuel found his attention divided between watching for pursuit and stealing glances at his companion. When she moved to adjust the canvas cover, her movements were fluid and graceful. The shift, worn soft from use, outlined every curve of her body, the fullness of her breasts swaying gently with the wagon's motion, the way the fabric clung to her hips when she knelt. She caught him watching once and held his gaze with steady eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Apache women aren't taught to be ashamed of their bodies," she said simply. "We're taught to know their power." The words hung between them like a challenge. By midday, they stopped near a shallow creek. Ayanna stepped down from the wagon, and Samuel watched the play of muscles in her calves as she picked her way over the stones. When she knelt to drink, the shift pulled tight across her backside, and he had to look away before his body betrayed the direction of his thoughts. "They would have killed you too," she said when he joined her at the water's edge. Samuel nodded. "I figured that's what you meant." Back in the room, she explained the Apache way, how being seen unclothed by a white man made her worthless for trade, a liability to be eliminated, how the man who saw her faced the same fate for violating what belonged to others. As she spoke, she began to unlace the ties at her throat, preparing to wash. The gesture was innocent enough, but it made Samuel's pulse quicken. "Doesn't sound like any of it's worth keeping," he said quietly, his voice rougher than intended. She paused in her unlacing, studying his face. "Maybe not, but it brought you to me." The admission hung between them, like a confession. When she resumed her washing, Samuel turned away to give her privacy, but not before he saw her smile, the first truly soft expression he'd witnessed from her. The riders came at dawn, 3 shadows against the pale sky. This time, the leader's patience had worn thin. Samuel stepped onto the wagon bench, rifle in hand. Behind him, he heard Ayanna moving, the soft whisper of fabric against skin, as she pulled on his coat. "Morning," the leader called, his tone mocking. "We're looking for a girl. Apache. Small. Might have been wearing not much the last time we saw her." Samuel kept his voice level. "Nobody here you need to worry about." The man's grin widened. "See, that's where you're wrong, freight man. She's coming with us." "She's my wife," Samuel replied evenly, the lie rolling off his tongue like truth. The words seemed to echo in the morning stillness. From behind him came Ayanna's sharp intake of breath, but she didn't contradict him. The leader's face darkened. "Piece of paper won't stop me." "Maybe not," Samuel said, raising the rifle. "But this will." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Samuel's finger rested against the trigger, and something in his eyes must have convinced the leader that there would be no more warnings. "Ain't worth dying over today," the man muttered, wheeling his horse around. As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Ayanna climbed onto the wagon bench beside him. She'd left his coat open, and the morning breeze pressed the shift against her body, outlining her form in vivid detail. "You didn't have to tell him I was your wife," she said softly. "I did," Samuel replied, trying not to notice how the fabric of her shift had gone nearly transparent in the early light. It was the only thing that made him hesitate. She studied him for a long moment, then reached for his free hand. Her fingers were warm, calloused from hard work, but surprisingly gentle as they intertwined with his. "If you're going to claim it to keep me safe," she said, "you might as well mean it." The words settled between them like a promise. They made camp early that day, choosing a sheltered spot among cottonwoods where the creek ran clear and cold. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ayanna surprised Samuel by beginning to prepare a more elaborate meal than their usual trail fare. She'd managed to catch fish from the creek, and she cooked them wrapped in wild greens she'd gathered during their stops. As she worked, kneeling by the fire, the shift pulled snug across her hips and thighs. Every movement was unconsciously sensual. The way she bent forward to tend the flames, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist. "You've done this before," Samuel observed, settling beside her. "My grandmother taught me. Before ... She didn't finish the sentence, but he understood. As they ate, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, Ayanna began to speak of her life before the capture, before the trading between camps. She spoke of morning rides across the desert, of ceremonies under starlight, of a world where she'd been valued for more than her body's worth to men. "I had chosen not to marry," she said quietly. "I wanted to be a warrior, to ride with the men. My father said I was too proud, that pride would be my downfall." Samuel watched the firelight play across her features. Maybe pride brought you to the right place. She turned to face him fully, and in the dancing light, her eyes seemed to hold all the warmth missing from her captivity. "You could still walk away," she whispered. "Leave me here. Tell yourself it wasn't your fight." Instead of answering with words, Samuel reached up to touch her cheek. Her skin was soft beneath his calloused palm, and when she leaned into the touch, something fundamental shifted between them. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The kiss that followed was inevitable as sunrise. Soft at first, tentative, then deeper as she responded. Her hands found their way to his chest, and he could feel her heart racing against his ribs when she pressed closer. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. The want in her eyes matched his own, but also something else. Trust, freely given for the first time. "The third time they come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It won't be to negotiate." Samuel nodded, understanding. "Then we'll be ready." That night, they slept in each other's arms for the first time. Not from cold or necessity, but from choice. In the morning, when Samuel woke to find her still curled against him, her shift twisted around her thighs, and her hair spilled across his chest, he knew that whatever came next, he'd found something worth fighting for. The third confrontation came not with dawn, but in the harsh light of midday. Samuel had chosen his ground carefully, a box canyon with walls of red sandstone that would echo gunshots like thunder and offer only one way in or out. When the three riders appeared at the canyon mouth, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces grim with purpose, Samuel was ready. He stood in the center of the canyon floor, rifle in hand, with Ayanna beside him. She'd braided her hair for battle and wore his shirt over the shift, but her stance was that of a warrior, not a victim. "You've cost me time and coin, freight man," the leader shouted, his horse dancing sideways. "This ends today." "Yes," Samuel agreed, his voice carrying clearly across the space between them. "It does." The leader's hand dropped to his gun, but Samuel's rifle was already rising. The shot, when it came, was precise, close enough to the leader's horse to send the animal rearing, but not close enough to kill. Yet. "She's my wife," Samuel called out, working the lever action. "That's all you need to know." "The next one aims higher," Ayanna added, her voice steady and sure. The leader looked between them, at Samuel's unwavering aim, at Ayanna's defiant stance, and something in his face changed. The hungry confidence was gone, replaced by the recognition that he'd pushed too far. "This ain't over," he snarled, but he was already backing his horse toward the canyon mouth. "Yes, it is," Samuel said quietly. The three riders disappeared into the desert heat, and the canyon fell silent, except for the wind through the rocks. Ayanna turned to him, and in her eyes he saw not just relief, but something deeper, a recognition that they'd crossed a line together and emerged changed on the other side. "It's finished," she said. Samuel lowered his rifle and reached for her hand. "The running's finished. Everything else is just beginning." That evening, they made camp in a wide valley dotted with cottonwoods, where a stream cut silver through the grass. Samuel looked out over the land and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of home. "This could be ours," he said, gesturing toward the fertile ground, the clear water, the gentle hills that rolled away toward distant mountains. Ayanna walked to the stream's edge, her silhouette graceful against the sunset. The shift, worn soft from their journey, moved with her body like a second skin. When she turned back to him, something had settled in her face, a peace he'd never seen before. "It's the first place that doesn't feel like I'm just passing through." As the stars emerged overhead, they sat by their campfire, closer than they'd ever been. Ayanna had let down her hair, and it fell in waves over her shoulders, catching the firelight like spun silk. The shift had slipped off one shoulder, bearing the curve of her neck and the hollow of her throat. "In Apache tradition," she said softly, "when a woman chooses her man, she weaves him something that will tie their spirits together." Samuel watched as she pulled a strip of leather from her bundle, soft hide she'd been working during their travels, decorated with small beads and patterns he didn't recognize, but somehow understood. I have no silver to offer, he said, taking the leather band. No church or preacher. I need neither, she replied. Only your promise. He tied the band around her wrist, his fingers lingering on the pulse point, where her heart beat strong and steady. I promise to honor you, to protect you, to build something with you that's ours alone. When she kissed him this time, it was with the full weight of choice behind it. Not gratitude or necessity, but desire freely given. Her hands found the buttons of his shirt, and he felt her fingers tremble slightly as she worked them open. Are you certain? He asked, covering her hands with his own. Her answer was to lean forward and press her lips to his chest, just over his heart. I've never been more certain of anything. What followed was tender and fierce by turns, a claiming and a surrender, a promise made flesh. In the dancing firelight, with the vast desert stretching away on all sides, they came together not as strangers thrown together by circumstance, but as two souls who'd found their match. Later, as they lay tangled together beneath the stars, Ayanna traced lazy patterns on Samuel's chest with her fingertip. What will we build here? She asked. Whatever you want, he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. A cabin by the stream, a garden, maybe horses if we can manage it. Children? The question was barely a whisper. Samuel's arm tightened around her. If we're blessed. She lifted her head to look at him, and in her eyes he saw not just love, but hope, the kind he'd thought was lost to him forever. Then we'd better get started, she said, and pulled his head down for another kiss. 6 months later, the cabin stood solid and true beside the stream, its logs chinked tight against winter winds. Ayanna's garden had yielded well, and the root cellar was full of preserved vegetables, dried meat, and the promise of plenty. Samuel had built corrals for the horses they'd managed to buy and trade for, good stock that would serve them well as they expanded their small ranch. But the greatest change was in themselves. Ayanna moved through their home with the confident grace of a woman who belonged somewhere, who was valued not for her body's worth to others, but for her mind, her strength, her partnership. The haunted wariness had left her eyes, replaced by contentment and purpose. Samuel had found his own healing in their daily rhythms, the satisfaction of building something lasting, of waking each morning to the woman he'd chosen and who'd chosen him in return. The nightmares of war had faded, replaced by dreams of the future they were creating together. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and they sat by their own hearth, Ayanna would sometimes touch the leather band still tied around her wrist, faded now from sun and work, but no less precious for its simplicity. Do you ever regret it? She asked one such evening. That day you opened the door. Samuel looked up from the harness he was mending, his hands stilling on the leather. Outside, snow began to fall, in fat, lazy flakes, but inside their cabin, warmth and love held winter at bay. Never, he said simply. It was the first door I ever opened that led me home. The West was still wild, still dangerous, still unforgiving to the weak or unlucky, but in their small corner of it, Samuel and Ayanna had carved out something that belonged entirely to them, a love born of honor, forged in fire, and sealed with promises that would outlast the changing seasons of the frontier. Sometimes, late at night when the wind howled across the desert, they'd hear distant riders passing through the valley. But it no longer mattered who they were, or what they sought. Those who would have torn them apart had lost their power the moment two hearts decided to beat as one. If this tale of honor and desire stirred something in your own heart, share your thoughts below. And stay close for more stories from when love conquered even the wildest frontiers.